All right, hello and welcome to today's video where we're going to be talking about the very important and very difficult step of getting mad at our caregivers and why this is so important when we want to reclaim or claim for the first time who we really are, what really matters to us, what our values are, what our true identity is, and when we want to find our natural, true path in life. And this is something that is also going to be deeply important for us when we are figuring out what real adult support and love looks like. Okay? So, learning to get mad at our caregivers is so much deeper than just being upset with our caregivers. And part of the reason why so many of us struggle to allow ourselves to get angry at our caregivers in a way that's truly cathartic and truly healing is because it means so much more to us than just being mad at our caregivers. All right, so this is what we're going to cover in today's video, because this again is something that if you work with me one-on-one, you're gonna know that this tends to be like a really big subject that we cover is anger at caregivers. And it's something that I work really hard to support people through because it is not easy and it is complicated and it is complex and it can be very confusing. And especially in the spirituality, self-help, personal growth world, where we are literally inundated with messages over and over and over again every single day, that in order to be spiritual and in order to be good and in order to be happy, we have to be forgiving, we have to be understanding, we have to be the kind of people who have compassion for our caregivers and we see where they're coming from and we can understand why they did the things that they did, and that we need to empathize with them, and that's the way to heal and to feel better and to find your life. And to a degree, this is true, all right? Eventually, we are going to get to a place where it is healthy for us to be able to empathize with our caregivers, see that they're human, see that they maybe didn't hurt us on purpose, to understand where they were coming from, to forgive, all of these things. That is where we get to eventually. We get to a place eventually where if they are still alive and still in our lives, that we, if this is appropriate for us, where we can accept who and what they are and figure out a way of relating to them in a way that's, working within the boundaries of what our caregivers are capable of in terms of how they can show up for us, how they can love us, how they can and cannot support us, how they are going to be, and not expecting them to be different. But that is something that we get to over time, okay? That is not something that we are going to just arrive at, or that we are going to just convince ourselves of, or that we are going to spiritualize ourselves into, because it is a very deep process to get to that place where we can be okay with how our caregivers treated us, where we can be okay with what happened to us, and where we can negotiate a relationship with them with healthy boundaries and healthy expectations, and where we can still be free to be ourselves and to express as we want to express, with or without their understanding or approval or capacity to support us, or where we figure out that the best thing for us to do is to not have a relationship with our caregivers, because in some circumstances and in some areas of life, that is the healthier option. There is no one size fits all when it comes to our relationship with our caregivers. And as much as the spirituality, self-help, personal growth world want to tell us that if you're really being spiritual and if you're really doing your work, you won't get triggered and you can just be in a place of like perfect peace even if you're around your caregivers and they're treating you terribly, that is not reality. Okay? For some of us, the most self-loving and respectable choice that we can make is to no longer have a relationship with our caregivers. For some of us, we're going to get to a place where we realize we can be okay with who and what they are. We can set up boundaries. We can adjust our expectations. And again, we can feel free to continue to be what we are and to value what we value and to live the lives that feel good for us, whether or not our caregivers can validate or understand that, okay? And this is just a very highly individual path that completely depends on what you need, all right? So again, I first just want to start by breaking the myth, busting the myth that to be spiritual or to do your work or to fully heal means that you're gonna be able to have a healthy relationship with your caregivers. This is not always the case, and it's not always that if we heal enough, we can have a healthy relationship with our caregivers, because there are times and places and spaces where our caregivers simply cannot be a safe place for us. And that is just gonna be the nature of reality, and we need to adjust to that nature, to the nature of that reality. And like I say, in other cases, we will find that we can heal and we can forgive and we can get to a place where we can be okay with them and what happens. Okay, but going back to the very beginning, which is that most of us are going to need to go through a process of being upset with our caregivers and learning where we have learned to internalize our anger, our sadness, our disappointment, our upset, our sense of injustice that we were experiencing in our relationship with our caregivers in on ourselves. Okay? For many of us, the reason that we can never feel safe inside of ourselves, the reason we are in a constant state of beating ourselves up and shaming ourselves and blaming ourselves, the reason why we can't figure out what our purpose is or what we want to do with our life or what is valuable or real or true for us is because we are stuck in the mindset, the physiological pattern of living and looking for our caregivers' approval. And we are not realizing that that's where it's coming from. And we are stuck in the mindset that if I am in pain, if I am suffering, if something is going wrong in my life, that this always means that there's something wrong with me. Versus being able to say, it might be something that I'm upset about in my reality. It could be that I am responding to something that is out of alignment in my relationships, in my life, and it's not me that's causing me my pain. And it's not that I need to fix or change or adjust myself in order to fix that pain, but rather that there's something off in my reality that needs to be shifted. Okay? Because again, remember that childhood coping mechanism, the childhood perspective is that caregivers are like gods, right? From our childhood perspective, our caregivers were our source of all things. They were our source of love. They were our source of nourishment. They were our source of connection. They were our source of security. And they were our source of information and understanding about the world around us, what was right and what was wrong, what was good, what was bad, what was true, what was false, what we were supposed to be and what we were not supposed to be. And from that childhood perspective, anytime we felt pain, anytime we were abandoned, shamed, blamed, we were in pain and our caregivers couldn't take it away, anytime we needed their love and their support and they didn't give it to us, anytime that they felt detached and weren't able to reestablish a secure connection that made us feel like we had a secure connection, like even if mom and dad get angry with me, even if caregivers are upset or whatever, unless they were able to communicate to us in a way that showed us that even if these breaks in the connection happen, that there's a reconnection and there's a reestablishment of that safety, and that we know that we can be ourselves, we can express ourselves, we can have our emotions, we can have our moods, we can have our phases, and that this isn't going to challenge the security of the relationship. Unless we had that, we were going to start to internalize any break in the relationship with our caregivers as something wrong with us. And we have to remember that from the childhood perspective, a break in our connection with our caregivers was an existential threat. It felt like death to us. As children, right? There's so much in this that, again, this is why the mystery school is so long. This is why coaching, we work on this so much. Because from your now adult perspective, it's probably pretty easy to look back on your childhood and to think things weren't that bad. My caregivers never actually abandoned me, or they were technically there for me, or, right, like I always had food, I always had shelter, whatever. But from the childhood perspective, when our caregivers pulled away from us, when our caregivers abandoned us, when our caregivers abused us in any way, when our caregivers told us that they didn't love us or didn't like us or didn't want us, or in any way communicated that to us, from the childhood perspective, we did not know that we were going to be okay. We did not know that we were going to be okay. We did not know that there was a big wide world out there where other people could love us or anything like this. We did not have the perspective that we now have as capable adults who can do things for ourselves, who can advocate for ourselves, who can provide for ourselves. We didn't have that perspective. So when our caregivers, if we had an insecure attachment to our caregivers, if they abused us, abandoned us, or harmed us in any way, if we had to become caregivers to our caregivers, if getting attention from our caregivers meant that we needed to empathize with them, that we needed to be counselors to them, that they started to confide in us, any of these things, we started to learn that we had to change ourselves to become something different, to provide in a way that we were not ready to provide, in order to be loved and therefore in order to be safe. Okay? We did not know that caregivers weren't the be-all end-all. We didn't know that if they were rejecting us, that we could still love these parts of ourselves. If they rejected parts of us, or if they rejected us and we associated it with they're rejecting me, I think it's because I'm doing this or that action, that then became, again, a part of ourselves that we would now read as being an existential threat to us. Okay? Anything we viewed as being the reason that we were being separated from our caregiver's love was going to be viewed as an existential threat, as something very deeply dangerous and something that we needed to get rid of, that we needed to fix, that we needed to have shame about, that we learned to guilt ourselves over. Okay? So these are the roots of self-hate. These are the roots of the parts of yourself that you think are not worthy of love, are not good enough, are bad, wrong, and shameful. If you associated them in any way with, this is why caregivers don't love me, this is why caregivers aren't supporting me, this is why caregivers aren't taking my pain away, this is why caregivers aren't available for me, this is why caregivers are abusing me, this is the thing I'm doing wrong. That is going to be a part of yourself that you have deep resistance to ever loving or accepting or getting to know. Because what that part of you means to you is that this is separating me from the perfect love that's going to equal perfect security. Okay? So we need to recognize that as children, our caregivers to us represented perfect security. That being loved by our caregivers represented to us having all of our needs met, being safe, getting that connection, that love, that validation, and that approval that we deeply needed as children, as well as all the survival needs. Love from caregivers to us as children meant perfect life, escape from all pain, and connection to everything valuable. Okay? To us, from our childhood perspective, our perspective was, if caregivers love, accept, and approve of me, I'm going to have all my needs met, and then I'm going to be able to express myself, my real self, my real emotions, my real thoughts, my real passions, the things that I'm interested in, the things I'm not interested in, the parts of my personality. I'm going to be able to express all of these things in a situation of safety. That's what a secure connection would have done for us as children. Caregivers' love equals I'm going to have my needs met, and therefore I am free to experience myself, to experience reality, to express my emotions, to be myself, and to be safe and to be loved. Okay? So people who grew up with a secure connection with their caregivers tend to be people who are better adjusted to life, who have less people-pleasing tendencies, who have less fear that they're going to be rejected all the time, who have more connection to what matters to them and what they care about and their passions in life, who have less shame, blame, and guilt about who and what they are, because they never learned that these parts of themselves equaled separation from safety. They were able to be themselves and feel safe, so they grew up being themselves. Versus people who had caregivers who were not able to provide that secure connection. We then grew up believing this is the reason that I am not experiencing safety. This is the reason I am not going to have my needs met. This is the reason I cannot have safety, love, provision, why I cannot express myself. Because these parts of myself are causing caregivers to reject me, to abandon me, to abuse me. And that is taking away my perfect safety and love. So from the childhood perspective, the way to have safety, the way to have provision, the way to be taken care of, the way that we were going to get our needs met and eventually be able to express ourselves was to become what we thought our caregivers wanted us to become. That's the fundamental bottom line of why we shame, blame, and guilt ourselves. Because if there was any amount of not having our needs met, of not having a secure connection, of abandonment, abuse, trauma, any of these things, we then perceived, what am I doing wrong to cause this? Because that's all we could see as children. We could not understand that caregivers were separate people from us, that could be wrong about things, that could be wrong about what is right and wrong and acceptable and not acceptable. We were not able to see that caregivers could be acting in a way that had nothing to do with us. We were not able to see that our caregivers could be flawed and imperfect and incapable of providing our needs for us. We just saw them as the source of everything. And if they were pulling away from us, abandoning us, abusing us, not providing for us, the only remedy we could see for that as children was, what am I doing to cause it? And how do I change myself so that I don't cause it anymore? And that's where shame, blame, guilt, and shame, blame, and guilt come in, right? Because then we started to have to say, there's this way that I want to express. I'm having these emotions, I'm having these thoughts, these are the things that I want to do, these are the things I want to be, this is the way I want to behave. And if we perceived this is the reason that caregivers aren't caring for me, this is the reason caregivers are abusing me, this is the reason caregivers are abandoning me, we weren't able to say, bad caregivers, right? We weren't able to say, caregivers are fucking up. Caregivers should be doing something different. Caregivers aren't living up to their duty as a caregiver. We said, this is a part of me that I can never express again. This is a part of me I must get rid of. This is an emotion I can't have. This is an aspect of self I can't have. This is a part of myself that is bad and wrong and that I must fix and get rid of. Because what we wanted was to fix ourselves, to change ourselves into what our caregivers wanted us to be, so that they would provide us with perfect love and perfect safety. So then we then grow up continually trying to fix and change parts of ourselves, to deny our emotions, to deny aspects of ourselves, to try to get rid of parts of ourselves, to try to fix and change parts of ourselves, to try to become what we aren't, so that we can try to get to that place that we thought we had to get to from our childhood perspective of perfection, where our caregivers would finally love and accept us. Because we perceive, again, that that is going to be the method. That's the way to get to safety. That's the way to become safe and secure. Okay? So when you are hating parts of yourself, when you feel shame, blame, and guilt, generally speaking, where that is coming from is from a base belief that this part of me is the reason I don't feel secure. This is the reason I wasn't loved as a child. This is the reason I wasn't cared for. And I have to get rid of it. I have to change it. I have to improve it. Because if I don't, I'm not going to be safe. That is the root of our self-hate. That is the root of our shame. That is the root of our guilt. This is what I perceive to be the thing in me that was the reason why caregivers didn't love me and therefore didn't provide perfect security, perfect love, perfect provision for me. And the reason we hold on to that self-hate The reason that we don't want to consider actually learning to love and accept these parts of ourselves. The reason we don't want to look for what our true emotions are. The reason we continue on with being people pleasers and being so afraid of letting other people down and living our lives for the approval of others is because we still have that fundamental program that if we are loved and accepted and approved of by the people around us, all of our pain will go away. And we will finally be loved and accepted. We will get the connection we want. We will get the provision we want. And then we can be ourselves. Then we can express ourselves. But we tend to just feel like if there's any level of not being loved, not being accepted, not being approved of, that we are not going to be safe. Many of us literally feel like we're dying when we feel like we're being rejected. And we think, what's wrong with me? Why am I so afraid of people not liking me? Why am I so afraid of people being mad at me? Why do I live my life walking on eggshells, wondering what everyone's thinking about me all the time? Because we learned deep in childhood that the only way to have perfect safety is to be perfectly loved. That was the blueprint that we got in our nervous systems. So then we grow into adults who have formed frontal lobes, and there's a part of us that can be like, okay, I can be okay if people don't like me. Or there's a part of us that's like, I might be able to stand being rejected. And we think that what's wrong with me that I'm such a people pleaser? What's wrong with me that I can't stand up for myself? What's wrong with me that I don't know how to just own my personality or to own the things that I love or to be my real self? Because it reads to your nervous system as death, as separation. And this is also why, on the flip side, why so many of us walk around feeling so triggered by rejection, feeling so much like if we get rejected or if people don't like us or if people don't understand us, that we are not going to be okay, that it is not okay, that it is not safe, that we really do need to hate and shame and blame these parts of ourselves because other people don't like them. Right? Because there's that ultimate belief that if I don't change, I'm going to be alone forever. I'm never going to be loved. I'm never going to be provided for. I'm not going to be safe. You see? You see this deep connection? So then, if we grew up in a household where parts of our true authentic nature were either outwardly rejected or where parts of our authentic nature were the things that we believed were the reason our caregivers were rejecting and shaming and abandoning us, we are then going to have a very deep nervous system connection to this part being the reason I am in pain. This part being the reason I am not safe and will not be safe. The reason people don't like me, the reason I will be alone forever, the reason I'm not going to have my needs met. So then we grow into our adulthood and we say, okay, well, I want to start to express this. I want to start to express my femininity. I want to start to express my sexuality. I want to start to express my extrovertedness or my artistic nature or whatever it is. And we find that we continually cannot get ourselves to do it. Or we literally feel like, I don't know who I am. I don't know what I want. I don't know what matters to me. I don't know what I'm passionate about. Because we've buried down our true nature so deep under shame, blame, and guilt that who we really are and what it is going to take for us to connect to who we really are, what we really want, and a life that actually works for us is going to mean learning to love and accept these parts of ourselves that we either perceived or that our caregivers actually did reject. Which is so much harder than it sounds. Because again, to our nervous system, these parts are an existential threat to our survival. I'm going to say that again. These parts that we associated with, this is why my caregivers don't love me. This is why my caregivers are pulling away from me. This is why my caregivers aren't supporting me. Those parts to our nervous system mean if I am that, if I express that, if I become that, if I allow myself to be that, I am going to be in pain and alone forever. That's what that means. And some of us, again, don't even know who we are or what we want to be. Because we are just so focused on trying to figure out what our caregivers wanted us to be. We are just so focused on still trying to figure out what would make them approve of us that we've never had the time to explore who we really are or what we really want or what actually matters to us. Right? For those of us who had caregivers where it seemed like literally no matter what we did, we couldn't get to that safe place. There was nothing we could do to establish a secure connection. It just felt like they always abandoned us, or they always shamed us, or they always told us that they didn't love us. No matter what we were achieving, no matter what we were doing, no matter what we were accomplishing or not accomplishing or expressing or not expressing, we are going to have probably the least amount of connection to who and what we really are. Because it was never about figuring out who or what we were. It was always about trying to figure out what they wanted us to be. And not disappointing them. And not getting on their bad side. And not doing something that would make them upset. So now we're living constantly just looking outside of ourselves for what do the people around us want us to be? What do the people around us want us to do? What would make the people around me like me? And we've never been able to take the time to even consider, what do I feel? What matters to me? What's real to me? Because we don't feel capable of getting our own needs met, being safe, being provided for, without external approval. We've never come into our adult perspective that says, people can be upset with me, people can not like me, people can reject me, and I can still be okay. We're still living in the childhood perspective that says, if I'm rejected, if I'm not liked, if people don't approve of me, I'm gonna die. So this brings me to having to get angry at our caregivers. If we are living in a state where we constantly feel shame, blame, and guilt, if we are living in a state where when we get hurt, when we're in situations that don't feel good for us, our automatic reply, our automatic response is, what am I doing wrong? I'm upset with myself, I'm blaming myself, I'm shaming myself. Versus, what is upsetting me? What do I actually feel? What am I actually experiencing? And why doesn't it feel good? If we are living that life, if we feel like we don't know who we are, or what we want, or what we value, if we feel like the worst thing that we could do is disappoint other people, and we're living our lives to just not disappoint others, we need to get upset with our caregivers. We need to start to change the direction of the emotion of rejection and hate and sadness and blame from ourselves to where it actually came from. Okay? Because again, at the end of the day, the real truth, bottom line is who you are and what you want to express is not bad, wrong, shameful. Oh, thank you. Who you are and what you want to express, your emotions, your true nature, the things that you value are not bad, wrong, and shameful. If you are in a situation where you are not being treated the way you want to be treated, where things don't feel good for you, where there's pain in your life, it's not because you are fundamentally shitty. That is not ever real reality. But if that's what you think real reality is, that is your trigger that you're stuck in childhood perspective. That you're stuck in perfect love exists, perfect safety exists, perfect provision exists, perfect circumstances exist. And the way that I get there is by being loved and approved of by those around me. And the way that I get to that is by fixing myself. The thing that is wrong is me. And you see how so many people have turned that into a spiritual teaching, right? The childhood perspective of if I just get my thoughts right, and if I just get my vibes right, and if I just get my actions right, and if I make all the right choices, I can have a perfect life. That's not how reality works. That is not how reality works. The way real reality works is this. As we start to discover who we really are, we are going to come face to face with the reality that some people don't like it. We are going to come face to face with the reality that there are some things about us that our caregivers may never accept and may always judge and reject. As we start to grow into our adult perspective, we are going to come to see that not everything that happens to us is because of us. Not everything that we go through is because we made a choice or we made a decision or we did something. We are not always the cause of everything. And we are going to have to start to recognize and realize that we need to learn how to become good problem solvers in life. That life is not every time I'm in pain, how do I fix myself? Right? How do I lose weight? How do I become more outgoing? How do I get rid of my people pleasing? Who do I need to impress? Who did I just disappoint or upset? That is not the solution. Right? So much in my one-on-one coaching work. We start with, okay, what are you feeling shame, blame, and guilt about? And what do you think you need to do about it? What do you think you need to change about you to get rid of that shame, blame, and guilt? And it's, I need to lose weight. I need to change my personality. I need to stop doing this. I need to stop doing that. I need to be what these people want me to be. And then we dig a little deeper into that, into why. Why do you think that? And we always get to, because then I'm going to be loved and then I'm going to be safe. And then we get to, okay, what are you actually feeling? If it's not shame, blame, and guilt, if what you're experiencing right now in your body, in your relationship with your significant other, in your relationship with your coworkers at work, in your situation with your body and your health, if it's not your fault because you are fundamentally flawed, what are you actually feeling? And people are like, I'm feeling angry. I'm feeling like this is unfair. I'm feeling like I'm not being understood. I'm feeling like I'm being projected onto. I'm feeling like I'm being expected to be something that is not true for me. I'm feeling like this situation is painful. And so people can start to actually get at their real, true emotions. Because, right, the childhood coping mechanism says, I'm in pain, what did I do wrong? The adult perspective says, I'm in pain, why? What's actually happening? And where is my power to fix or change the situation, or to learn something new, or to grow? So again, it's not to say that it's never something that we're going to change in ourselves, but from a place of true awareness and understanding, there's going to be a direct connection between how we're living our lives, why that might be causing us pain, and there's going to be deep compassion. Never self-hate and judgment, but deep compassion for why we are doing what we're doing. And even if it's harmful and chaotic and doesn't work, we're going to be like, okay, but I understand why I'm doing that. I see the innocence behind it. I see why it's just my attempt at getting my needs met and being safe. And then you start to understand what your needs actually are, right? I want more money. I need more support. I feel afraid that this or that is going to happen. And then we start to say, okay, how do I actually deal with that situation? Versus thinking, if I just become less loud, right? Change my personality, everything's going to be fine. That's not reality. And so by getting angry at our caregivers, we start to then make room for our real, true selves to come to the surface. To say, it wasn't me that was broken. It wasn't my fault that my needs weren't getting met. It's not that I was fundamentally messed up. It's that my caregivers failed to give me the secure connection that I needed. My caregivers failed to give me the secure connection that I needed. And again, from our adult perspective, a lot of the time we can be like, yeah, well, it wasn't their fault. They were abused too. They didn't have the means. They weren't able. They didn't do it on purpose. They were trying. They were overwhelmed. Da, da, da. And all of that can be totally true. But in order to process and to get to a place where you are able to stand in your truth, you are able to own these parts of yourself that you have been rejecting your entire life, to get to a place where you are actually healed enough to be able to be yourself and have compassion for your caregivers, we have to go through a phase of centering your experience. That is the thing that most people have never allowed themselves to do, and it's why we get stuck. Trying to jump to compassion for your caregivers, or understanding them, or just trying to forgive and forget, is skipping a step. Because even if your adult self can see that your caregivers didn't do it on purpose and can see the higher reason and all of this stuff, that doesn't change the experience your childhood self had. Your adult perspective does not change the experience your childhood self had. And we need to go through a phase of loving and accepting and centering the feelings of our childhood self if we are going to heal. Our childhood self needs to hear, you were not bad, you were not wrong, you were not shameful. Your caregivers should have loved you, whether you were living up to their expectation or not. You were deserving of love, respect, provision, and safety. No matter how you were expressing, no matter what your emotional expression was, no matter what your personality was, no matter what you loved or didn't love, you needed a safe space to be given your needs, have your needs met, to have your emotions validated, and to have room to explore your true personality. That's what all of us deserve. And if we didn't get that, we were hurt and we were harmed. We learned to hate, shame, and blame parts of ourselves, which we now need to reclaim through first being upset with our caregivers for not providing that for us. So no matter how much we can empathize with them now in our adult perspective, the childhood self still needs to hear that it wasn't their fault, that they weren't the cause, that caregivers failed them, that they didn't fail their caregivers. And it needs to hear that over and over and over again. And the childhood self needs to cry, needs to get angry at mom and dad, needs to be sad, needs to be upset that they were abused or that they were abandoned or that they weren't given what they needed. And the childhood and adult self both need to hear. And now your current coping mechanisms, the way you sabotage yourself, the way you're a people pleaser, the way that you nitpick your body 24/7, the way that you think you need to change your personality all the time, the way that you're completely afraid that people are not going to like you and you just live your life based on what other people think of you, is not your fault. It's not because you're weak. It's not because you lack self-love. It's not because you're broken. It's because you're literally trying to figure out what you need to do and what you need to be so that you will be liked and loved and therefore safe. That is why you're doing it. You need to hear that it's not your fault and you're not fucked up and you're not broken. That you have all of these habits because somewhere deep inside you believe this is what is required for you to have safety. That's why you're doing it. That's the bottom line. So how can you grieve and be upset and angry with the fact that you didn't get that perfect love and safety? That is the actual healing path that eventually will lead to a place where we can embrace the reality that perfect love is never going to exist. That perfect safety is never going to exist. That we are never going to be loved and approved of enough. That we never struggle again, that we never suffer again, that life is perfect. And this, again, is the bottom line of why getting mad at our caregivers is so hard. Because what it actually means is letting go of the fantasy that if I perfect myself, I'm going to have perfect love and perfect safety. Getting angry with our caregivers is about letting go of the fantasy of perfect love and perfect safety. Right? When we let ourselves go through this process of realizing that our caregivers messed up, and that they were never going to be able to provide for us perfect love and perfect safety. And that even if they had, the real world was still going to exist. And that we are not in complete control. That we cannot perfect our vibes or perfect our personality or figure out our purpose or perfect our bodies or perfect our emotions enough that nothing painful ever happens again. We can start to step into the true adult perspective. That is, life is messy, and we're just going to figure it out one step at a time. That is what healing the inner child really leads to. When we have healed the inner child, we realize I'm never going to be able to perfect myself enough to be fully loved and therefore fully safe. That fantasy is a fantasy and it doesn't exist. And then we can start to say, okay, right? I'm free now. I'm free from this idea that all of my pain is my fault, or that I can get to a place of perfect love and perfect safety if I perfect myself. And we can start to deal with real reality. We can start to say, okay, well, I'm going to start to express these parts of myself, and people aren't going to like them, and I'm going to do it anyways. I'm not going to be loved by everybody. Maybe my caregivers will never understand me. Maybe they will always be abusive. So what do I need to do to live in a way where I can actually support the real me within real reality, where there is no perfection, there is no perfect love, there is no perfect security. We just do our best. And where I can start to empower myself as an adult to look for where my real power is. Right? My real power is not in figuring out how to have everyone around me approve of me. That's not going to lead to the life that I want. The thing that's going to lead to a life that I want is me expressing myself as much as I can and learning how to problem solve within real reality. Learning how to figure out what's happening, why it's happening, why I'm feeling what I'm feeling, and what I can do for myself in this moment. And like I said, right, for some of us, that is going to lead to a place where we can understand that our caregivers are imperfect and that they're always going to be the way that they are, and that we have to learn how to be ourselves even if they don't approve of it, and that we have to learn to value what we value even if they don't value it. And we have to go through those scary nervous system challenging moments of embracing these parts of ourselves that our bodies are going to be like, if you are this, you're going to die. And we have to do it anyways. But again, we first have to be angry with caregivers. Childhood self needs to hear it wasn't their fault. Childhood self needs to hear they were not the cause. Childhood self needs to hear parents messed up, you didn't mess up. And we need to go through that phase of being angry with them so that we can eventually let go of the idea that perfect love was going to exist and that we can perfect ourselves to a degree that they love us enough that all of our pain goes away. And then we can start to stop shaming and blaming and guilting ourselves when we're in pain. Right? We can start to say, okay, I'm feeling sick, not what did I do wrong? But what caused me to feel sick? What's actually going on here? Or I had an altercation at work. What's wrong with me? Okay, no. What actually happened? Where was there miscommunication? Where are you not being understood? Where are people not treating you with respect? You see what I'm saying? We can start to step into real reality versus being stuck in the never-ending, What did I do wrong? How do I fix myself so that perfect love can exist? And that's what getting mad at our caregivers is all about. It's about finally being able to process all that pain so we can get to a place of accepting that perfect love is never going to exist. And so we got to learn how to be ourselves and embrace what's real for us and go through that scary process, knowing that perfection is never going to exist. Knowing that we're just going to take it one step at a time. Knowing that we can problem solve and that we can figure things out. And that the problem is not always something is broken about me and I need to fix myself when I'm in pain. We can step into real reality where we assess what's actually going on. Because I promise you, your pain is not always because there's something wrong with you. Okay? So do we have any questions or comments or concerns? This is big work. And like I say, this is like why a lot of the time I suggest people go to therapy or get coaching or whatever it is. Because learning to validate these parts of ourselves is incredibly challenging. It's so second nature to hate ourselves and to say, nope, but this though, right? I can hear everything that she's saying, but this part of me really is bad. And this really is my fault. And I really am shameful and broken and bad and wrong. Because those patterns have just been there for so long that sometimes we do need someone outside of ourselves to be like, no, that's not true. And to help hold our hand in investigating what's really going on. That's why I do coaching work. That's why I have the mystery school. That's why I make so many of these videos. Because it can be really hard to do it on our own. But I just want to say, right? Shame, blame, and guilt are always lies. Everything you think is wrong with you isn't. And I promise you that. That is true. I want to know what you're really feeling and what you're really experiencing, right? Because like, again, we talk about listening to your real emotions, but we can't hear our real emotions if we're still shaming and blaming and guilting ourselves, if we're still believing that our pain is all our fault, or that if I perfect myself, I will find perfect love and safety. That's the biggest disconnection from real reality that we have. And until we go through that process of being angry at our caregivers so that we can let that go, we're going to be stuck in our cycles of never seeing real reality. Okay? Okay. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that made sense. I hope we walked through that enough. Let me know in the comments what you think, if you have any questions. Look at my link tree or my bio or my website for more resources. I'm always here. And yeah, I hope you have a beautiful week, and I will see you next week. Thanks for being here. Thanks for talking. And I'll see you later.